This is the Eon TSC tank farm simulation. It was developed in a partnership between Eon and TSC to train TSC personnel in the procedures involved in facilitating the operation of a tank farm environment. This includes protocols for opening and closing valves, operating pumps, and monitoring for correct values on digital readouts. The program was designed to simulate a real-time environment by using real-time values pulled from a TSC server. It does this by using these two software platforms, TSC SimCreate and OPC server, respectively. As you can see, TSC SimCreate and OPC server contain a map of all the valves and tanks in the simulation. These correspond to the valves and tanks in the Eon simulation, and their values are stored on a virtual server that the Eon software can pull values from or communicate values to. Thus, upon startup, TSC SimCreate and OPC server will synchronize with the Eon Studio, and the latter will determine the position of all the valves and tanks on the tank farm, as well as the values displayed on the readouts, based on the values it receives from the TSC server. In this way, the interplay between the two programs simulates a real-time tank farm environment. Now, the tank farm itself, as you can see here, is set against the background of a desert environment and contains 6 tanks, as well as pipework regulated by many different kinds of valves, as the aforementioned digital readouts, and on the back tanks, staircases on top of what they call the floating roofs of the tanks that I'll show you in a minute. Now, the controls by which the user interacts and moves around the tank farm are mapped onto the Xbox controller. The left stick allows the user to move their position, the right stick will move the camera, the X button allows them to duck and then to stand up again. The primary interactions, however, involve the laser that you can see in front of me, which the user can use to select objects such as valves. And indeed, this is the gist of the main two types of interactions the user can engage in. One involves the selection and manipulation of valves. So, if the user points the laser at a valve, they can then press the B button to select it. Now, if the valve is currently being controlled by the TSC software, its position cannot be changed by the user. However, if it is currently being controlled by Eon, then the user can use the trigger buttons to change its position and either open or close it. So, in the case of V30305, B, since it is now in Eon control, it can be opened or closed. Now, there are many different kinds of valves on the tank farm in addition to these standard quote-unquote red handle valves. These include the flow control valve, which may be seen here, as well as the yellow indicator valve, which you can find in various places, including between these two tanks, which look like this, as well as the needle gauge valves, which you can see here. Both of these being distinct in that they indicate whether the valve is open or closed, depending on the one hand, the position of the yellow indicator, and here the position of the needle. There are also, as I mentioned before, these floating staircases, or rather these floating roofs, which have moving staircases attached to them. And they too are controlled by values sent from the TSC server. So while this is the roof at, I believe, 24% open, the TSC software, or if the user has control manually, Eon can move it up to, say, 100%. Now, the second type of interaction that the user can engage in is in the manipulation of pumps and alarm triggers. And these pumps come largely in two types, which I will show you in a moment. So the two types are one-way and two-way. Regardless of the type, the underlying controls for the pumps are the same. If the user selects the pump button using the B button and then presses the A button, they trigger the pump, as you can see in the animation there. The two-way pumps, however, which are these, which have this both a green and a red button, are slightly different in that while the user can still select them and press A to try and trigger them, it is ultimately they are ultimately controlled, always partially controlled by the TSC software. So in this case, even though I press A, nothing will happen unless TSC okays it on the other side, like this. In that case, you can see the buttons moving and the animation playing. And then the final pump interaction is the alarm, which again, the user can select, much like the one-way pump and the two-way pump, the user can select it using B and then interact with it using A, and it will trigger, as you can hear, alarm sounds. Okay, so that just about summarizes the entirety of the tank.